The number on the chart stopped me before her face did. Room 412. Cardiac Observation Unit. Eastbrook Medical Center. I had been rounding on the floor for 6 years, and in that time I had learned to read a room before I entered it, the angle of the blinds, the way a call light blinks differently when someone has been pressing it too long, the particular silence of a patient who has stopped expecting comfort. I stood at the threshold and looked at the name printed in the top right corner of the intake form on my tablet. Margaret Elaine Corrigan. Date of birth, March 7, 1951. Emergency admission, 11:47 p.m. the previous night. Chest pain, shortness of breath, irregular rhythm flagged at triage. I had not spoken to Margaret Corrigan in 4 years, 3 months, and 11 days. She was sitting up in bed when I pushed open the door. She had aged in the way that people age when they have spent decades being certain of things, a particular tightness around the mouth, the kind that comes from a life of pronouncements. She was looking at the window. She did not look at me when I entered. She said, "The other doctor said someone from cardiology would come by." I said, "That's right." She turned then. And I watched the exact moment her brain refused what her eyes were telling it. The mouth opened slightly. The hand on the blanket stilled. I let the silence hold. "Eleanor," she said. It came out as something between a question and a verdict. "Dr. Eleanor Marsh," I said. "Director of Cardiovascular Services. I'll be managing your care." I pulled the rolling stool to her bedside, uncapped my pen, and looked at her chart. Her face, in my peripheral vision, was doing something I had imagined for a long time without ever quite believing I would see it. "Hello, everyone. Before I continue, if you have ever been told you would never amount to anything by someone who was supposed to believe in you, leave a comment below. I want to hear your story, I mean that. Because the moment I just described did not happen by accident, and it did not happen quickly, and there were years, long years, when I was not sure it would happen at all. But to understand why that moment meant what it did, I have to take you back. 22 years back. In the fall of 2002, I was 26 years old, working 32 hours a week at a medical records intake office in downtown Cincinnati, and taking pre-med prerequisites at night at Hollander Community College. I was not, by any reasonable measure, a medical school applicant. I had a bachelor's degree in health administration from a state school, $14,200 in credit card debt I had accumulated keeping myself housed during a bad stretch after college, and a GPA that was technically respectable, but not the kind of number that opens doors quietly. I was opening doors myself, and most of them were locked. The records office was where I learned to read a chart the way other people learn to read a room. Every piece of paper that passed through my station told a story, a diagnosis delayed, an insurance policy that denied a referral, a specialist appointment rescheduled 3 times because the authorization didn't clear. I read those documents with a focus that had nothing to do with my job description. My supervisor, a kind man named Gerald Hutchins, noticed me one afternoon reorganizing the flag denial files by pattern rather than by date. "You sorting those for a reason?" he asked. "I think there's a systematic error in how the cardiology department is coding their pre-auth requests," I said. "About 30% of the denials in the last quarter come from the same 3-digit modifier mismatch." He looked at the stack, then he looked at me. "You taking classes at night?" "Yes." "Keep doing that," he said, and walked back to his desk. Margaret Corrigan, my mother's older sister, my aunt by blood if not by warmth, had a different view of my situation. The family gathered that Thanksgiving at my cousin Brian's house in Kenwood, the kind of house that announces its own square footage. I arrived with a sweet potato casserole I had made from scratch because I could not afford wine, and within 40 minutes of sitting down, I was at the kitchen table across from Margaret and my mother's other sister, Dottie Wren, and the conversation had turned, as it always turned, to what I was doing with my life. "Eleanor is taking science classes," my mother said from the doorway, in the tone she used when she was trying to help and succeeding only at making things worse. "At a community college," Dottie said. "A lot of medical professionals start at community college," I said. Margaret set down her wine glass. "Medical professionals." She said it the way you repeat a phrase when the phrase itself is the joke. "Eleanor, you're 26. You work in a file room. Medical school takes 4 years, then residency, then, what are you talking about? What are you actually talking about?" "I know the timeline," I said. "You don't have the grades," she said. "You don't have the money. Your father didn't leave you a cent, God rest him, and your mother is not in a position." She stopped herself, looked at my mother briefly, then back at me. I love you, but someone has to be honest with you because apparently no one else will be. You are not going to be a doctor. You need to find something realistic. I did not argue. I had learned by then that arguing with Margaret was like performing surgery on a mirror. Everything you did just came back at you, inverted and bright. I said, "Thank you for being honest." And I went and got more casserole, and I ate it standing at the kitchen counter looking out the window at Brian's backyard, which was large and well-maintained, and I thought about what realistic meant and who got to decide it. 3 weeks later, my mother told me that Margaret had spoken to a friend who sat on the admissions committee at the University of Cincinnati's College of Medicine, not to recommend me, to ask, as a favor, whether someone with my profile would realistically be competitive. The answer she received, and relayed to my mother, who relayed it to me with a pained expression, was that it would be, quote, an uphill battle. My aunt had used her connections to confirm that I should give up. I went home that night and opened my laptop and looked up the MD/PhD program at Whitmore University School of Medicine, which had a combined program with a cardiovascular research focus that had been mentioned in a journal article I had read at work that week. I printed the admissions requirements page. I folded it into quarters and slid it into the back of my wallet, behind my library card. I kept it there for 7 years. The inheritance dispute came that same winter, and that was the thing that made silence not just a preference but a strategy. My father had died in 1998 with a small life insurance policy, $38,500, that he had named both my mother and me as co-beneficiaries. He had always told me that the money was there if I ever wanted to go back to school. He said it the way fathers say things they mean. Once, plainly, with no drama. When the policy paid out, my mother put it into a joint account she held with my Aunt Margaret, who had been helping with the finances since my father's death. By the time I learned the money existed in that account, 18 months had passed. By the time I asked about it, it had been, in Margaret's word, absorbed. Into what? I asked. We were on the phone. It was January 2003. Into the household account. Your mother had expenses, property tax, the furnace. Alina, this is not, my father left me that money. He left it to both of you, and your mother needed it, and she needed help managing it, and that's what family does. If you want to make an issue of this, I want what my father left me. Then you should have been here. You should have been paying attention. Instead, you were working in your file room and taking your little classes, and the world doesn't wait for people who aren't present. I consulted a family law attorney that spring, a woman named Diane Osai at the firm Osai and Brandt in Cincinnati, who reviewed the policy documentation and told me that recovering the funds would require proving commingling of assets with intent, which was possible but would cost more in legal fees than the inheritance was likely worth. $19,000, my share. The cost to recover it, she estimated, between $12,000 and $22,000, with no guarantee. I thanked Diane Osai. I paid her consultation fee of $300 from my grocery budget. I did not pursue the case, but I wrote down the number, $19,000. I wrote it on the inside back cover of the notebook I used for organic chemistry. I looked at it sometimes before class. It clarified things. In September of 2004, I applied to 7 medical schools. I was rejected by 5 of them before Christmas, waitlisted at 1, and accepted provisionally at Hartwell School of Medicine in Columbus, contingent on my completing 2 final prerequisite courses with a B+ or higher. I got an A- in biochemistry and an A in genetics. I was 31 years old when I started medical school. Most of my classmates were 23 or 24. Some of them were visibly confused by my presence in the way that young people are confused by anything that doesn't fit the pattern they've been handed, not unkind, just baffled. I did not explain myself to them. I had been in a records office for 6 years. I had read more patient histories than most of them had read textbooks. I was not there to explain myself. The near failure came in the spring of my first year. Financial aid at Hartwell operated on a 1-semester disbursement cycle. In March of 2005, a processing error, a single digit transposed in my Social Security number on a federal form, delayed my spring disbursement by 11 weeks. Tuition was due April 1st. I had, in my checking account on March 28th, exactly $847. I went to the financial aid office and explained the situation to a man named Gerald Park, who was the director of Student Financial Services and who would later become one of the few people I kept in contact with from that period. Gerald Park had a reputation among students for being inflexible and procedural, which was accurate. He also had a reputation for being unreachable, which was not. I emailed him at 6 a.m. on March 29th. He responded at 6:22 a.m. with a list of 4 steps I needed to complete before noon. I completed all 4 by 10:15. The disbursement was released on a temporary administrative bridge fund on April 2nd, 1 day late, with no academic penalty. Most students, Gerald Park told me afterward, when I stopped by to thank him, wait until the deadline has passed to start problem solving. I know, I said. That's a useful instinct for a physician, he said, and went back to his paperwork. My mother called me that spring to tell me that Margaret had mentioned, at Easter dinner, that she thought it was admirable that I was still pursuing medicine, but that the field was very competitive and perhaps I had considered nursing. Nursing was also a valuable profession. I thank my mother for passing that along. I hung up and studied for my pharmacology exam. There was a student in my cohort, a woman named Priya Anand, who would later do her residency at Johns Hopkins and who is now one of the leading pediatric specialists in Atlanta, who had noticed me in the library one night in February, working through a stack of cardiology journals I had requested through interlibrary loan. She sat down across from me without asking. "You're in the records office," she said. I said. "Pre-med. I used to work in medical records intake." "That explains why you read charts differently from everyone else in our small group." I looked up. "You read them like a story," she said. "The rest of us read them like a test." We became, not immediately but steadily, the kind of friends that medical school creates when it creates them at all, the kind forged in the specific exhaustion of learning to think under pressure. Priya was the first person outside my professional life who I told about the inheritance. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Are you angry?" "Not anymore," I said. "I was, now I'm interested in being right," she laughed. "That's a better use of energy," she said. She was not wrong. I matched into internal medicine at Whitmore University Hospital in 2008, the same Whitmore whose cardiovascular research program I had printed from my laptop in 2002 and folded into my wallet. I had not manufactured that coincidence. I had simply worked toward it long enough that it stopped looking like a coincidence. The residency program was run by a man named Dr. Solomon Vick, who had been chief of internal medicine at Whitmore for 14 years, and who had a reputation for being indifferent to residents until they showed him something that interested him. He showed interest in me at the end of my 3rd week, when I flagged a potential drug interaction in a 72-year-old patient's medication reconciliation that 2 attendings had cleared. The interaction was between a newly prescribed anticoagulant and a supplement the patient had listed on her intake form under vitamins. Fish oil at a dose that, combined with the anticoagulant, created a meaningful bleeding risk that the automated system had not caught because the supplement was not in the interaction database. The patient did not bleed. She went home 4 days later in stable condition. Dr. Solomon Vick stopped me in the hallway on a Tuesday morning in October and said, "Where'd you flag that interaction?" "Intake form," I said. "She listed it under vitamins." "Everyone listed it under vitamins," he said. "You're the one who read vitamins." After that, he had a habit of stopping at my workstation when he was making rounds, the way a teacher circles back to a student who has given an unexpected answer. He did not praise me in public. He simply appeared, regularly, as a signal to the rest of the team that I was someone whose work was worth observing. I understood what he was doing. I did not take it for granted. In 2010, 18 months into my residency, I presented a case analysis at the Whitmore Cardiovascular Symposium, a monthly research conference open to residents, but rarely participated in by anyone below attending level. My analysis was of a pattern I had identified in a cohort of 31 patients across 6 months. A correlation between delayed specialist appointment, scheduling in the outpatient cardiology practice, and elevated readmission rates within 90 days. The delay was not random. It tracked against a specific insurance policy classification, a mid-tier commercial plan that had stricter pre-authorization requirements for cardiology referrals, which meant patients on that plan waited, on average, 19 days longer for follow-up care. 19 days. It doesn't sound like much. In cardiology, it is a great deal. The analysis was, by the standards of a resident presentation, unremarkable in format. What it contained, a proposed triage modification that would route high-risk patients on those plans to a same-day nurse practitioner bridge visit, was, as Dr. Vick told me afterward, 6 years ahead of where the department is thinking. He said it as a compliment. I received it as a timeline. By the time I completed my residency in 2011 and began my fellowship in cardiovascular medicine at Whitmore, I had 3 publications in peer-reviewed journals, one as primary author, and a departmental reputation that had been built, deliberately and entirely, without reference to my family. They did not know I was at Whitmore. They did not know I had matched anywhere. I had told my mother I was finishing up training, and she had said that's nice, honey, and asked if I was eating enough vegetables, and I had said yes, and we had spoken for 6 more minutes about a television show she was watching, and I had hung up and gone back to writing. The fellowship ran through 2013. In the fall of that year, I received board certification in cardiovascular disease. The ceremony was in a ballroom at the Marriott in downtown Columbus, and the name they called was Dr. Aliner Voss Marsh, Voss being my mother's maiden name, which I had added to mine during residency in a gesture I never fully explained to anyone, not even Priya, though she guessed its meaning and did not press. I sat in that ballroom and held the certificate in both hands and thought about the folded piece of paper I had kept in my wallet for 7 years. I had thrown it away in 2009 when I matched because I no longer needed it. The address was already inside me. I did not call my aunt. I did not call my mother. I drove back to my apartment alone, stopped at a Thai restaurant I liked, ate at the counter with a journal article on my phone and paid the check. She had no idea what I had become. None of them did, and I had every intention of keeping it that way. In January of 2017, I was appointed Director of Cardiovascular Services at Eastbrook Medical Center, a 340-bed regional hospital on the east side of Cincinnati. I was 40 years old. The appointment came after 18 months of negotiation that I had managed with the help of my attorney, a man named David Reyes at the firm Callaway, Reyes and Associates, who specialized in physician contract law, and who had reviewed 3 previous offers from the hospital board before the 4th one was structured in a way that reflected what I was actually worth. The final contract included a department budget of $2.3 million annually, authority to hire and terminate within my division, and a performance incentive structure tied to outcomes metrics I had proposed myself. I moved into the director's office on January 9, 2017. It was a corner office on the 4th floor with windows that faced east and south. On clear mornings, the light came in at an angle that made the room look like something out of an architectural photograph. I put nothing on the walls for the first 2 months. I wanted to look at the room without deciding what it meant yet. My deputy director was a cardiologist named Dr. Marcus Belfort, who had been at Eastbrook for 11 years and who had expected, by several accounts I would learn only later, to be appointed to the directorship himself. He received the news of my appointment with the controlled neutrality of a man who has been professionally disappointed before and has learned not to show the inventory of it. He was in my office on my first morning with a briefing binder and a cup of coffee he had not brought for me, and he sat across from my desk and said, "I want you to know I have no interest in relitigating the decision. I'm here to do my job." "Good," I said. "I'm going to need someone who knows this department from the inside. I'd like to start with the readmission data for the last 3 years. He blinked once. "That's specific." "It's where the story is," I said. He became, in time, not a friend exactly, but something more useful, a collaborator who trusted my judgment because I had demonstrated, methodically, that my judgment was worth trusting. By the end of our first year together, the department's 30-day readmission rate had dropped by 11%. By the end of the second, we were cited in a regional healthcare quality report as a model program for post-discharge follow-up protocol. I had a colleague on the administrative side of the hospital, the vice president of patient services, a woman named Renata Solis, who became, over those first few years, the person at Eastbrook who knew me most fully. Renata was 53, had been in hospital administration for 25 years, and had a gift for reading institutional dynamics that I recognized as similar to my own. We had lunch together every other Tuesday, and over the course of a year, those lunches had expanded from professional debriefs into something closer to actual conversation. It was Renata who I told about my family. Not all of it, not the inheritance, not Diane Osei, not the $19,000 written in the back of a chemistry notebook, but enough. The Thanksgiving, Margaret's call to the admissions committee, the way the word realistic had been used against me like a verdict. Renata listened the way Renata listened to everything, which was completely and without interruption. Does she know what you do? Renata asked. No, I said. Does any of them? My mother knows I'm a doctor. She doesn't know I run a department. Why not? I thought about it. Because the moment they know, I said, they'll try to make it about something it isn't, about forgiveness, about the family being proud, about me coming home. I paused. I'm not ready for that to be the story. Renata nodded slowly. What happens when they need something? That's the other question, I said. I didn't answer it then. I would answer it later, in room 412, with a chart in my hand and a woman in a hospital bed who had once told me I was not going to be a doctor. In March of 2019, I had come closer than I ever told Renata, to the surface breaking early. My mother had been referred by her primary care physician in Cincinnati to a cardiologist for a stress test. The referral had gone to Eastbrook. The appointment had been scheduled. It had landed, through the ordinary mechanics of the referral system, in my department's scheduling queue. I had seen her name in a routing report on a Monday morning. I had stared at it for a long time. Then I had transferred the appointment to our sister clinic in Norwood, close enough geographically that my mother would not notice the difference, far enough that she would not pass through my floor. I had documented the transfer as a routine capacity management decision, which it was not. I told no one, not even Renata. My mother went to her stress test, received a normal result, called me 2 weeks later to mention that the cardiology office had been very professional, and asked if I knew anything about a referral to a specialist for a routine follow-up she had received in the mail. I told her it was standard post-test protocol. She said, "You know so much about these things." I said, "I've learned a bit." I had come that close to everything surfacing before it was time, but it wasn't time yet. The letter arrived on a Friday. It came to the hospital, addressed to me by full name and title, routed through the administrative intake office, opened and logged by our administrative coordinator Janelle Obi, who placed it on my desk with a post-it note that read, "This looks personal, wanted you to see it first." It was from a firm called Whitmore & Gage, attorneys at law. The return address was a suburb of Cincinnati I did not immediately recognize. It was written on behalf of the estate of my uncle Arthur Corrigan, Margaret's husband, who had died 6 weeks earlier, a fact my mother had mentioned briefly in a phone call I had taken while walking between meetings, and which I had logged internally with the same professional detachment. I tried to apply to most information that came from that direction. The letter indicated that Arthur Corrigan's estate included a trust document, executed in 2007, that named several family members as contingent beneficiaries of a property asset currently valued at approximately $340,000. My name was among them. The letter requested that I make contact with the estate attorney of record, a woman named Sandra Fitch, at my earliest convenience, to confirm my participation in the estate review process. I read the letter twice. I set it down on my desk. I looked out my east-facing window at the November sky, which was the particular gray of late autumn in Ohio, cloud flat and close. Then I picked up my phone and called David Reyes. "I have something I need you to look at," I said. "Estate matter?" he asked. He had the particular attunement of an attorney who has known a client long enough to hear the shape of a problem before its name. "Yes," I said, "and it involves family." There was a brief pause. "Send it over," he said. "I'll read it tonight." I put the letter in a manila envelope, sealed it, and gave it to Janelle to courier to Callaway, Reyes and Associates that afternoon. Then I went back to my patient rounds. I had 3 consults scheduled before 5, 2 of them complex, one of them a case I had been tracking for 8 days that was finally moving toward a resolution I had been working toward since the admission. I was a doctor. I had work to do. The other thing would unfold in its own time. It always does. David Reyes called me the following Monday morning at 7:45, which told me something before he said a word. David Reyes did not call before 8 unless the matter warranted it. "I read the letter," he said, "and the trust document Sandra Fitch attached. I have some questions." "Ask them," I said. I was at my desk with coffee and a patient progress report I had been working through, and I set the report aside. "The trust was executed in 2007, he said. "Arthur Corrigan named 6 contingent beneficiaries, you're one of them. The property in question is a residential investment property in Hyde Park, assessed at $340,000, but Fitch's letter puts the current equity at closer to $260 after the remaining mortgage balance. What are the terms of the contingency? That's the question, David said. The trust language is ambiguous. The original document names beneficiaries contingent on a specific condition. Arthur's words were family members who have contributed to the maintenance and integrity of the family. There's a handwritten annotation on the 2014 amendment page that attempts to define that phrase, but the annotation isn't countersigned by the attorney of record. That makes it contestable. I was quiet for a moment. Who is contesting it? I asked. Margaret Corrigan, he said. Or she will be, once she understands she has grounds. The estate attorney hasn't presented the full picture to the family yet. There's a preliminary meeting scheduled for the 22nd of November at Whitmore and Gage's offices. I see. Eleanor, David said, and there was a particular precision in the way he said my name that meant he was moving from information to advice. Your cousin Brian Corrigan has already been in contact with Sandra Fitch's office. He retained his own counsel last week. A man named Philip Garrett at Garrett & Sons. They filed a preliminary claim asserting that you do not meet the trust's contribution condition on the grounds that you have been, and I am reading from their filing, estranged from the family unit and non-participatory in family affairs for an extended period. I put my coffee down. They filed before the preliminary meeting, I said. Yes. Without notifying me. Yes. I looked out my east-facing window. The November sky was the same gray it had been the Friday the letter arrived. It occurred to me that Ohio in November has a particular talent for producing skies that look like waiting. What do I need to do? I asked. I need you to gather everything, David said. Financial records, professional history, anything that documents your circumstances during the period the trust defines. And I need you to let me make a call to Sandra Fitch before you contact anyone in your family. I wasn't planning to contact anyone in my family, I said. Good, he said. Then we're already ahead. I called Renata Solis that evening from my apartment, which was something I rarely did. Renata and I maintained a professional courtesy about after-hours contact that we both valued. She picked up on the second ring. I need to tell you something, I said. Tell me, she said. I told her about the letter, the trust, Brian's filing, the phrase non-participatory in family affairs. When I finished, there was a brief silence. They're going to argue that you abandoned the family, Renata said. Yes, and your position at Eastbrook, they don't know about it. No, another silence. Then, what are you going to do? I'm going to let David handle the legal side, I said, and I'm going to do exactly what I've been doing for the last 17 years. Which is my job, I said, and wait for the right moment. I signed the first document that night, a formal authorization for David raised to represent me in the estate proceeding and to subpoena financial records from the joint account my mother and Margaret had held from 1998 through 2006. There was no going back. The preparation took 6 weeks. David Reyes was thorough in the way that good attorneys are thorough, not dramatically, not with announcements of what he was building, but with a steady accumulation of requests, responses, and filed documents that I tracked from my office on the 4th floor of Eastbrook without comment. He called me every Tuesday and Friday. Each call lasted between 12 and 20 minutes. He did not speculate. He reported. Sandra Fitch has agreed to a joint preliminary meeting, he said, on a Friday in early December. December 22nd, her offices in Blue Ash, all named beneficiaries and their counsel. Who has counsel? Brian retained Philip Garrett. Margaret has retained a woman named Carol Hess at Hess and Dunmore, estate specialist, good reputation, not flashy. Your mother has not retained anyone. She won't, I said. She'll let Margaret guide her. That's my read too, David said. Now, the subpoena on the joint account. The records came back this morning. I waited. The $38,500 policy payout was deposited into the joint account in March of 1999, he said. Over the following 14 months, $19,200 was dispersed in transactions that do not correspond to any documented household expense I can identify. The transactions are coded as miscellaneous transfers. 3 of them, in amounts of $4,000, $6,000, and $9,200 respectively, cleared in the same 6-week window in the fall of 1999. What was in the fall of 1999? I asked, though I already knew. Margaret Corrigan purchased a rental property in Hyde Park, David said, in November of 1999. The silence between us was specific. Is that the same property named in Arthur's trust? I asked. It is, David said, with the current equity of approximately $260,000. I set my pen down on my desk. I looked at it for a moment. David, I said. How many of the trust beneficiaries know that the property was partially funded by my father's life insurance? None of them, he said, as far as I can determine. Does Sandra Fitch know? She does now, he said. I sent her the account records this morning with a cover letter requesting that they be entered into the estate record before the December 22nd meeting. I thought about the Thanksgiving table in 2002, the wine glass, the word realistic. The way Margaret had said your little classes with a particular downward tilt of her chin that I had not been able to fully describe to anyone, because it was the kind of gesture that only makes complete sense when you have grown up understanding exactly what it means. What's our position? I asked. Your position, David said, is that you are not merely a contingent beneficiary under the trust. You are a creditor of the estate, to the extent that the property's initial acquisition was funded in part by assets that were rightfully yours under your father's insurance policy, assets that were commingled and dispersed without your consent or knowledge while you were 23 years old and your father had been dead for less than a year. The statute of limitations on commingling, I said, is not the question here, David said. The question is equitable distribution. And in the context of a probate proceeding, a judge has significant discretion on equitable grounds. We are not filing a fraud claim. We are making an equitable argument to the probate court. Those are very different things, and the second one has substantially better odds. And Garrett's filing, the one arguing I don't meet the contribution condition, becomes considerably more complicated, David said, when we introduce the evidence that the property being distributed was, in part, built on your contribution. I almost smiled. How does that read in legal language? It reads, David said, as poetic justice. That was the moment I understood exactly how much they had underestimated me. Renata came by my office the following week, on a Wednesday, with 2 cups of coffee and the particular expression she wore when she had been thinking about something for a while and had decided to say it. How are you holding up? She asked. Fine, I said. The preparation is going well. I'm not asking about the preparation, she said. I'm asking how you are. I looked at her. Outside the windows, it was raining, the specific December rain of Ohio that is technically not yet snow but carries the same intent. I'm steady, I said. I've been preparing for something like this for a long time, not this exactly, but something like it. What do you need it to do for you? She asked. The outcome. What does it need to accomplish besides the obvious? I thought about that. I need the record to be accurate, I said. Whatever they decide, I need the actual story to be in the room. Renata nodded slowly. Then that's what you're building, she said. Not a win. A record? Yes, I said. Exactly that. She was right. And holding onto that distinction between winning and witnessing was the thing that kept my voice level in the weeks that followed, when the easier thing would have been fury. Among the documents David assembled was a complete financial disclosure of my professional earnings from 2008 forward, not because the estate proceeding required it, but because Philip Garrett's filing had characterized me as someone who had contributed nothing to the family and had, implicitly, done nothing worth accounting for. David intended to enter my professional record into evidence as part of the equitable argument, demonstrating that the woman Brian and Margaret were characterizing as absent and non-participatory had, during her absence, built a career that any reasonable person would recognize as a form of sustained, solitary achievement conducted without a single dollar of family support. It was a medical record of a different kind, not a chart, but a history. And I had been, without knowing it, keeping it for years. The call from my mother came on a Sunday afternoon in mid-December, 8 days before the scheduled meeting at Sandra Fitch's office. I was at home, reading, when my phone showed her name. Margaret mentioned that you received a letter from Arthur's estate, she said, after the usual opening pleasantries. Her voice had the particular careful quality of someone delivering a message they did not entirely understand. I did, I said. She said there's some kind of meeting. She wanted me to ask if you were planning to attend. I'll be there, I said, a brief pause. She also said, and I'm just passing this along, Alina, you know how she is. She said that given how little you've been involved, she wanted you to know that the family's position is going to be that the estate should be kept within the immediate family. Her words. She said she didn't want you to come to the meeting expecting something and then be disappointed. I let that sit for a moment. I looked at the book in my lap. I looked at the rain on the window, which had resumed and showed no sign of stopping. Tell Margaret I appreciate the heads up, I said. You're not upset? No, I said, I'll see you on the 22nd. My mother sounded relieved, which told me Margaret had expected an argument. I had not given her one. I had given her, instead, nothing to prepare against. She thought she had won. She had 8 more days. What Margaret did not know, as she made her Sunday phone call through my mother, was that David Reyes had already submitted a formal motion to the Hamilton County Probate Court, requesting that the estate proceeding for Arthur Corrigan's trust be placed on the court's supervised docket, rather than proceeding through private mediation alone. The motion cited the newly surfaced financial records and requested that a probate magistrate be assigned to oversee the distribution determination. Sandra Fitch received notice of that motion on Monday morning. The offices of Whitmore and Gage, attorneys at law, were on the 3rd floor of a professional building in Blue Ash, in a suite that had been decorated in the early 2000s and not substantially updated since. Dark wood paneling, framed prints of European landscapes, the kind of neutral professional aesthetic designed to make everyone feel equally at home and no one feel particularly welcome. The conference room had a long table with 8 chairs. A credenza held a coffee service that no one touched. I arrived at 11:45 for a noon meeting. David Reyes was already there, standing near the window with his leather portfolio open. He looked up when I came in and gave me the particular nod he used when he was satisfied with how things were positioned. Margaret arrived at 11:59, with Carol Hess beside her and Brian 2 steps behind. Brian had his attorney Philip Garrett with him, a man in his mid-50s with the careful posture of someone who has been sued before and has learned to distribute his weight accordingly. Margaret wore a dark blazer and the expression of someone attending a proceeding they consider a formality. My mother arrived at noon exactly, alone, looking between the 2 sides of the table with the expression she had worn at every difficult family moment of my life, not quite aligned with anyone, not quite neutral, positioned at the edge of things and hoping not to be asked to choose. Sandra Fitch, the estate attorney, was a small, precise woman in her 60s who had introduced herself to me in the hallway before the meeting with the specific warmth of a professional who has managed difficult family situations long enough to know that warmth is a form of control. She had reviewed David's submitted materials. I could tell from the way she had looked at me in the hallway, with a kind of careful attention, that the materials had adjusted her understanding of the room. The meeting was structured as a preliminary estate conference, not a formal hearing. Fitch opened by presenting the trust document, summarizing Arthur Corrigan's intentions, and outlining the contingent beneficiary structure. She read the relevant clause aloud: family members who have contributed to the maintenance and integrity of the family. Philip Garrett spoke first on Brian's behalf. He characterized my absence from family life as a deliberate withdrawal that disqualified me from the trust's intent. He used the phrase chosen estrangement twice. He was fluent and measured, and made the argument sound reasonable. I watched Margaret's face during his remarks. She had the expression of someone listening to a rehearsed performance they have approved in advance. When Garrett finished, Carol Hess added a supporting statement on Margaret's behalf. She was efficient, 4 sentences, no elaboration. She had been here before. She knew when a proceeding was already moving toward an outcome and spoke accordingly. Fitch turned to David. David opened his portfolio. He did not begin with an argument. He began with a document. "I'd like to enter into the estate record," David said, "a certified copy of the deposit and disbursement records from the joint account held by Patricia Marsh and Margaret Corrigan from March 1999 through June 2001. He slid copies to Fitch, to Garrett, to Hess. These records document the deposit of a $38,500 life insurance payout from the estate of Richard Marsh, father of Eleanor Marsh, co-beneficiary under the policy." He paused. "And they document 3 disbursements totaling $19,200 made to Margaret Corrigan in the fall of 1999. The room changed. It didn't change dramatically. No one stood up. No one raised their voice. But the quality of the silence shifted the way the air in a room shifts when something structural has moved. I watched Garrett look at the documents. I watched him look at Brian. Brian was looking at Margaret. Margaret was looking at the paper in front of her, with an expression I had never seen on her face before. It was the expression of someone who has just recognized a landscape they thought was far behind them. For context, David continued, the November 1999 property purchase in Hyde Park, the same property now named as the trust asset under review, was made with a down payment of $19,000. The timing and amount of the disbursements from the joint account correspond directly to that acquisition. That was the first document. I had 3 more. Carol Hess said, "I'd like a moment to consult with my client." "Of course," Fitch said. The room broke for 5 minutes. David and I stood near the window. I watched Margaret and Carol Hess at the far end of the table, speaking in low voices. Margaret's hands were flat on the table. She was not moving them. She was listening to her attorney with the particular stillness of someone who has just been told that the ground they were standing on has different geology than they believed. My mother at the edge of the table was looking at me. I met her eyes. She looked away first. When the room reconvened, Fitch asked Brian's counsel to respond. Garrett said, "We weren't aware of these records. We'd like to request a continuance to review." "That's your right," Fitch said. She looked at David. "Mr. Reyes." "We have no objection to a continuance," David said, "provided the court's supervision of the proceeding remains in place." He set the second document on the table. Which brings me to this, the probate court's confirmation that this estate proceeding has been placed on the supervised docket, effective December 20th. A magistrate has been assigned. The asset distribution determination will require court approval. Garrett looked at the document. That was filed without notice to the other parties. It was filed in accordance with Ohio probate law, David said, which does not require consent of other parties for a motion to place a proceeding under court supervision. The motion was granted on its merits. The thing about a well-prepared legal record is that it does not argue. It simply exists. It has the particular authority of something that has already been decided, not in the room, not by the people present, but by the institutional mechanisms that the room cannot override. Philip Garrett was a competent attorney. He knew what supervised probate meant. He knew that the documents on the table were not a negotiating position, they were a structure. Brian said from his chair, "Eleanor, just the name." He said it with a kind of disbelief that was not quite accusation and not quite question. It was the tone of a man who has opened a door expecting a room and found a corridor instead. I looked at him. "Yes, you knew about this." How long have you been?" He stopped. He tried again. "You work in a hospital." "I'm the director of cardiovascular services at Eastbrook Medical Center," I said. "I've been in that role since 2017. The silence after that was different from the silence after the documents. The documents had shifted the legal ground. This shifted something else, the story they had been telling about me. The one in which I was the person who had walked away, who had done nothing, who had contributed nothing, who was not going to be a doctor. That story required a specific version of me to be true. And the specific version of me sitting at that table, with a full professional history entered into the estate record, and an attorney who had been preparing this case for 6 weeks, was not that person. Margaret said nothing. Her hands remained flat on the table. "The estate record," David said, producing the third document, also includes a summary of Dr. Marsh's professional history from 2004 to the present, including her board certification in cardiovascular disease, her appointment as director, and her department's documented outcomes record. He set it on the table. "This is entered in response to the claim, made in the initial filing, that Dr. Marsh has been non-participatory and has contributed nothing to the family or to the world beyond her absence. I want the record to reflect what she has actually been doing." He slid the fourth document to Fitch without comment. "And this is a formal equitable claim, filed with the probate court, asserting that the Hyde Park property was acquired in part with funds that constituted Dr. Marsh's share of her father's life insurance, funds that were commingled and dispersed without her knowledge or consent in 1999 when she was 23 years old. We are not alleging fraud. We are asserting an equitable interest in the asset proportional to the contribution. The court will determine the appropriate adjustment." Sandra Fitch reviewed the fourth document for a long moment. Then she looked at Margaret. "Ms. Corrigan, this is a material development in the estate proceeding. I have to advise you, and I'm speaking to all parties, that in light of this submission, the court will almost certainly require a full financial disclosure from all named parties before any distribution determination is made." Financial disclosure. The phrase landed in the room with the specific weight of words that mean real things to real people. I watched Brian and Garrett exchange a look. I watched Carol Hess write something on her notepad. Margaret finally spoke. Her voice was controlled, but only in the way that something is controlled when the effort required to control it has become visible. "Eleanor," she said, "this isn't necessary." I think it is, I said. Your father would not have wanted, my father, I said quietly, left me money so I could go back to school. I went back to school, I kept going. I built something with nothing, without anyone's help, and without anyone knowing for 20 years. I'm not here to punish you. I'm here because the record should be accurate. She looked at me for a long moment. Her mouth was slightly open, as if a sentence had begun somewhere and had not been able to find its ending. Then she looked down at the table. My mother, from her chair at the edge of the room, said, "Eleanor." Her voice was the voice she used when she was reaching for something she didn't have words for. "You're a director?" "Yes," I said. "Of a whole department?" "Yes." She looked at her hands. She nodded once, slowly, as if she were receiving information her body needed a moment to process. Then she looked up at me, and her expression was not what I had expected. It was not pride, or shame, or either of the things I had prepared myself for. It was simply recognition. As if, after a long time, she was finally seeing the person who had been standing in front of her all along. The magistrate assigned to the Arthur Corrigan estate proceeding issued a determination in February of the following year, February 14th, which I noted without sentiment as I read the document David had messengered to my office. The determination found that equitable grounds existed for an adjusted distribution and awarded me a settlement of $87,000 from the property sale proceeds, representing a calculated proportional interest that accounted for both the original commingled funds and the accrued equity from the years of ownership. The remaining proceeds were distributed among the other beneficiaries per the original trust structure with one modification: the unauthenticated handwritten annotation on the 2014 amendment, the one that would have been used to exclude me on contribution grounds, was ruled inadmissible for lack of proper attestation. Brian received his share. My mother received hers. Margaret received what the trust entitled her to, minus the adjustment. It was not a dramatic outcome. No one went to prison. No one was publicly disgraced. The legal settlement was filed in Hamilton County Probate Court and became part of the public record in the way that estate proceedings do, available to anyone who went looking, noticed by almost no one. That was appropriate. I had not wanted a spectacle. I had wanted accuracy. Margaret Corrigan sent me a letter 6 weeks after the determination. It was handwritten, which surprised me. 3 paragraphs. The first recounted, in modified form, her version of the events of 1999, which differed from the documentary record in the way that memory always differs from documentation, not dishonestly, exactly, but selectively, in the direction of self-understanding. The second paragraph said she had not meant to cause harm. The third said she hoped I was well. I read it twice. I put it in the file folder where I kept the estate documents. I did not respond immediately. After 2 weeks, I wrote back a single paragraph, brief, civil, not warm and not cold, in which I said I received her letter and that I was well, and that I hoped she was too. I meant it in the way that you can mean a thing without its meaning everything. My mother and I began speaking more regularly after that. The conversations were different from what they had been before, not because anything had been resolved exactly, but because something had been named. She called me by my full name now sometimes, with the title attached, not to impress me or acknowledge a hierarchy, but in the way you say a person's full name when you have finally understood who they are. It was a small thing. It mattered more than it should have, and I allowed it to. I remained at Eastbrook. My department's readmission rate held steady at 12% below the state benchmark. We published a paper in February of 2020, in collaboration with the Whitmore research team, on the triage protocol I had first proposed at a resident conference 10 years earlier, the one Dr. Solomon Vick had said was 6 years ahead of where the department was thinking. In the acknowledgments, I thanked the medical records intake staff, who had first taught me to read a chart as a story. Renata Solis retired in 2022. At her retirement dinner, she gave a speech in which she described the people who had shaped her understanding of what institutional leadership could mean, and I was one of 4 people she named. She said, "Eleanor Marsh taught me that the most powerful thing in a room is not the person who speaks first. It is the person who has been preparing longest." I sat at the table and looked at my water glass and said nothing, which she would have understood as the highest form of agreement. Priya Anand, who is now one of the leading pediatric specialists in Atlanta and who once sat across from me in a medical school library and told me I read charts like a story, calls me on the first Sunday of every month. We talk for between 20 minutes and 2 hours depending on what is happening in our lives. She knows everything. She has known everything for years. She is the only person outside my professional life who knew, before the estate proceeding, what I had built, and she never once suggested I should tell the family before I was ready. The $87,000 is in a retirement savings account. I did not spend it dramatically. I put it in a place where it would work, quietly, over time, the way I had learned to work. Room 412. The morning I opened the door and Margaret Corrigan looked at me from a hospital bed and said my name like it was a question. I managed her care for 4 days. Her arrhythmia was identified, treated, and stabilized. Her discharge plan included a follow-up specialist appointment with one of my senior cardiologists and a modified medication regimen to replace the one her previous physician had been managing with tools that were, frankly, 10 years behind current protocol. The health insurance coverage she carried, a Medicare supplement plan, covered the hospitalization fully and the follow-up without issue. I reviewed her medical records from her prior cardiologist personally, made 2 corrections to the medication reconciliation, and documented the changes clearly so that any physician seeing her afterward would have an accurate picture. She was not an easy patient. She was particular about the room temperature and had opinions about the nursing staff schedules. I received 2 of these opinions directly, and I listened to them, and I addressed what was addressable and noted the rest. On her 3rd morning, she looked at me during rounds and said, "You're very good at this." "Thank you," I said. "I didn't know," she said. She was not apologizing, she was simply reporting. "I know," I said. "I should have." She stopped, she tried again. "I wasn't right about you." I looked at her chart. I noted her morning vitals, which were improved. I wrote a note in the record and capped my pen. "You weren't," I said. "But here we are." She was discharged on a Thursday. I was not on the floor when she left. I had a department meeting at 9 and a research call with Whitmore at 11 and a hire interview at 2. The day was full, the way my days are full, and I moved through it the way I move through all of them, deliberately, specifically, with my attention on what is in front of me. She had once told me to be realistic. I had been. I had been entirely realistic about what I was capable of, and entirely realistic about how long it would take, and entirely realistic about the fact that no one in that kitchen at Thanksgiving 2002 was equipped to see it. That was the most realistic thing I had ever done, deciding to see myself clearly when the people around me could not. And if there's anything this experience taught me, it's this. 1. What you build in silence is yours in a way that nothing announced in advance can ever be. The work done without witnesses, without validation, without permission, is the work that no one can rewrite. 2. Documentation is not a weapon and it is not a threat. It is simply the truth given a form that institutions can recognize. And the person who has been keeping accurate records, while everyone else has been keeping comfortable stories, will always have more to say in the rooms that matter. 3. Your family's failure to see you is information about their limits, not a verdict on your potential, and the life you build from that understanding is not a life of revenge, but a life of proof, and proof, in the end, is quieter and more durable than any argument. Was I wrong to say nothing for 20 years, to let the people who doubted me keep doubting me, while I built the career and the record and the legal position that would eventually speak for itself? Tell me in the comments. If this story gave you strength, hit that like button. It means more than you know.